it will happen. We can influence it at various levels, but it's happening. So we've looked to try and break our projects up into what can we influence and what we can't, and how do we get back to what is our end goal. By adapting and changing elements, be it use class, be it how we build it, be it how we operate it, be it how we market it, and influence the bits in the development that we can with our clients. And sometimes those are quite open and tough conversations. But if we put to one side things that are stressful, but we can't change, and focus on what we can actually influence, then we can drive things forward. Internally, we sort of founded the business we built a mission statement with our guys, which is building focused, creative and calm environments that inspire trust and collaboration. And we looked at the key pillars of our project, and sort of our ethos is, if those key pillars are there, if it's calm, if people know what they're doing, they're focused, there's space for creativity, if we've got trust around the table with teams, then we know we're going in the right direction.
Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast. Today we are joined by Andy Cox, co-founder and director of Trigon DM. Set up in the depths of the pandemic, Trigon is a B-Corp Development Manager with the sole aim of making their clients' lives easier. Their track record spans the full breadth of development, front to back, back to front, and that includes all the unique challenges one would expect. Andy studied civil engineering at the London South Bank University, as well as undertaking his BSc in construction management at the University of Brighton. And he has always applied his training in civil engineering and experience in construction management to building and development. And it gives me great pleasure that he joins me on the podcast today. So welcome, Andy.
Morning, thank you.
Not at all. Well, look, I'm really excited to get tucked into Trigon and the business and how you see the market and what you're doing day to day. But before we get onto that, a question that I always like to ask the guests that come on the podcast is, how and why did you get into real estate?
So, I have to be honest that it wasn't my intended sector when I left school. I was one of those people who had to make a decision whether to go to uni or not. And I decided that probably wasn't the route for me. I'd probably have a bit too much fun and not come out with a huge amount of value after 3 years. So I was working locally, and I told you this story the other week that a friend of mine's dad was a director at CISC, actually, one of the main contractor. And I was working in the pub one night and he came in for karaoke. And I ended up finishing my shift and doing karaoke with him. And he rang me on the Monday and asked if I wanted to come and have a look around one of the sites that we discussed. And I have to profess, I don't remember discussing that with him that evening. So I went and had a look round, got a really good feel for the business and joined them as a trainee engineer. And then I was with CISC for a number of years. They put me through London South Bank, as you mentioned, doing my civil engineering HNC. And it was really quite a vocational learning process with them, a very sort of family values based business. There was a great guy there, Julian Armitage, who was charged with the development of the younger people in the business, and he took great pride in that. And they put me through Brighton University to do my construction management degree, which, having worked for 4 years, was a bit of an eye-opener that there were 100 odd people in the room who'd never been on a building site and were learning how to deliver schemes out of a textbook, which was probably the first point I realised that we struggle as an industry with the vocational piece and the divide between the academic and the vocational and how interlinked they are. So I was with CISC for 8-9 years, and then, as a lot of people do, fancied a change. Probably someone from your world knocked on my door and said it might be another opportunity. So I went to McLaren for a year, and that was a great reflection piece, really, looking back on the learnings I'd had for 8 years with CISC. And sometimes you don't appreciate that sort of learnings when you're in the midst of it and knee deep in the mud and holding the staff for the engineer. So I spent a year at McLaren delivering a scheme, and then I actually went back to CISC for another 3 or 4 years delivering schemes on Regent Street, partly drawn back by that sort of family values of the business and that real investment in the workforce, which grew that business really well.
So before we kind of unpack that CISC experience in a little bit more detail, where did you grow up, and did you have family or connections to the real estate world?
I grew up in Surrey, a little village called Limpsfield, and no connection to real estate whatsoever, really. My father's an optometrist, or was, retired recently, and my mother was a radiographer, so nothing to do with that industry. I think, like I say, when I finished school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And when I went and visited these sites and got in the midst of it, the breadth of personalities and people on a building site, in the office, on the site, in the office, at head office, bringing all that together and how that knitted together really fascinated me. And I'll be honest, it was more about the people. The product was great, building things was exciting, and I got to love that. But the first thing that really caught my eye was, how do you get 100, 200 people pushing in the same direction to deliver something that's quite complex at the end of the day?
So when you were in that inflection point, deciding to go to university or not, what was your plan? You touched on you worked at a pub. Were you just, pulling pints just to earn a little bit of money to give yourself a bit of headroom to work out which direction you wanted to go in? And before you had this chance karaoke sing-off, what were you thinking you were going to do?
I'd started looking at training as a electrician, thinking I quite enjoyed being on the local sites I was working on. Felt like quite a good career move to get a skill and take that forward. So that was sort of the direction I was heading in at the time. And again, that was slightly by chance. That was the work that was available to me, and I quite enjoyed it.
And what kind of kid were you growing up? If you could reflect on that period, how would you characterize yourself at school?
I was probably a bit of a joker at school, to be honest. I was normally the one that would make everyone laugh and then get in trouble for it. But sport's always been a big part of my life. So I played a lot of rugby, hockey, football. And I think that really was my trajectory. Some people are very education focused and disciplined about that. But for me, the education piece was probably the fun. And I was quite focused on my sport and developing that, and really, really enjoyed that across different sort of types of sport.
So chance meeting at a bar or pub that you're working at, getting involved with some karaoke, waking up the next day and having a conversation or an invitation to come and have a look around a few sites. Did you know what you were getting into at that stage, and what job did you actually start off doing when you joined the business?
I didn't really know what I was getting into, is the honest answer. I was at a point in my life where I was up for experiencing something new, seeing what was out in the big world, and getting on the train up to London at 19 to go and look around these sites was quite exciting. So when I joined them, I was a trainee engineer. So I was literally the chain boy, as it would have been back in the day, holding the staff for the engineers. And technology wasn't what it is now. We had one laptop on site, which I wasn't allowed to use. And I'd be out on site doing levels, setting out, and learning sort of the basic fundamentals of the maths that goes behind the engineering within a construction site. And that was really great. And it taught you huge amounts of discipline. Technology is fantastic, and we're really embracing that as an industry and as a business. But at the time, you really had to plan. We had to fax the engineer on the Thursday for the information we wanted the following Thursday. We then had to order the materials for the element of the build we wanted to deliver the following Thursday. So it really drove in about forward planning, understanding where you're trying to get to, and managing different personalities to get the information from them so you could deliver what you'd set out to deliver at the beginning of the scheme.
And were you working on all manners of schemes and sites and types of properties at this stage, or was it quite focused?
It was a bit of a mix. We did quite a bit on Regent Street for the Crown Estate. So down the south end where it sweeps around, which is a beautiful part of London. We did a lot of work with them, cut and carve and extending some of their properties there behind the existing facades. And we did a bit of industrial as well. We were out in Kingston building home bases and things like that. And a bit of residential as well. We delivered a big scheme up at the top of Bolsover Street, which was a residential scheme. So it was really, really nice to be able to see those different sectors, work with different clients and deliver different products.
And how did your role evolve having joined the business in 2005? What did that career progression look like in the first few years?
So Cisco were at the time very engineering based. There was a real ethos around doing things properly, and that aligns quite nicely with specifically engineering, and you need to get things right and work them through. So when I joined as a trainee engineer, there was quite a clear career path through the business, which was part of your onboarding, and it was a real selling point to me that actually there's a plan here. we know what we can provide for you in terms of education and support, and then taking that through your career. And it was really up to you as an individual how much you wanted to embrace that and push that forward, and at what speed you wanted to do that.
And apart from your slight dalliance with McLaren for a year, you kind of came back because you really bought into the values and the opportunity. What did you kind of come back to do, and how did your role actually evolve from, assisting to probably leading?
So when I came back into obviously a more senior role, senior contracts manager. So that would be sitting over a number of projects. So we had 3 on the go at the time, 2 of them for the Crown Estate on Regent Street, delivering quite complex projects. And that was a bit of a shift to managing bigger teams across multiple projects. Managing people in a room that all have a single goal to suddenly managing 2 or 3 teams that have slightly different goals on each project. So it was a bit of a shift, but a really good step in my career. And again, the support network is there within that business to allow you to do that and give you the tools to grow into that role. And
did you, given your sporting background and interest, did you feel that there were a lot of transferable skills from, being on the rugby pitch to, trying to coordinate, motivate, hold account these project teams across numerous projects? Yeah, definitely. I've always ended up in a sort of leadership position on the pitch, be it pack leader or captain or whatever. And there's interpersonal skills there that you learn, be from when you can see someone's about to flick the switch and go off the rails, or just learning how to bring some of the quieter members of the team into the arena and get the best out of them. And I think the other thing it taught you, I had a great, probably the maddest coach I ever played under, a guy called Sticky Crammond, and he used to talk about what you can and can't influence. You can't change the weather, you can't change the referee, but there's other things within your game reacting to those challenges that you can change. And that was a real thing that I tried to bring into projects. Rather than worrying about what we can't control, let's focus on what we can control, how we can change that, and how we can maximise and use those opportunities. When did you get the feeling that this is the career that you wanted to pursue, or you wanted to kind of double down in this real estate world, whatever kind of route in you'd kind of got? I think quite early, to be honest. Like I say, I just love the breadth of people you come across in all parts of a project, and as obviously as your career progresses, you're exposed to wider networks as well. So I'd say pretty early in the process, I realised it was a good place to be. And then every time, like I say, you took another step in your career and you had more face time with clients, or more face time with funders, you'd find there are other sort of levers to pull and people to get to know, and other areas of a project you can influence and grow to try and drive towards the best outcome and a great goal. So you left John Sisk in 2015 or so. Can you just talk to me about why you left and what you wanted to go and do and where you landed? So I'd sort of got to a point in the contracting world where I'd got a little bit frustrated with being handed a ball of risk and having to manage this small part of what is a wider development. And obviously, as I progressed in my career, your eyes were opened a bit to how many different inputs and outputs there are in a development. And development starts way before a contractor's involved, but also progresses into operational phase as well. A lot of people see development as ending at completion or 5 years after completion, but actually we can change and influence a development through its operational phase and to deconstruction and start again. So I really wanted to move a bit more into the development world, and I was lucky to come across Queensbury Real Estate at the time, who were looking for recruits, and I went and worked there under a director, John Muntz, who had a vast amount of experience in delivering these schemes. So I was lucky the opportunity came along. It's not a normal jump people make, contractor to development manager, and moved over to Queensbury. Why is it not a normal move? I think there's a bit of a perception the skill sets are very different in the market, that contractors are very technically based, quite rightly so, in delivery, and I think that is shifting a bit. But jumping straight into that development world is sort of a quantum leap into something else that has a huge number of different influences that perhaps in a traditional contracting model, there's less of that interface. So it was quite a steep learning curve going across and suddenly sitting in front of pension funds and discussing with them the best way for them to leverage the best value out of their existing assets. Did you find actually having that kind of bottom-up, ground-up viewpoint was really beneficial when you did sit in front of those fund managers or capital partners or development management kind of context. Was that really useful because you understood what the granularity of a scheme or a site or a project was?
100%, yeah. It's something we try and profess within Trigon as well. We like all of our team to have an element of technical grounding. I think fundamentally, whilst development is a big sphere, big part of our role is delivering schemes and building schemes. And fundamentally, if we don't know how they go together, we're not in the best place to be able to give people advice. So that really did help, that sort of technical, literally how do things bolt together and go up, helps us with feasibilities and sequencing and technical challenges, but also helps us grow that relationship with our wider project teams when we're sitting in the room with engineers and architects and the specialist disciplines, facade engineers, people like that. We have an understanding of what their challenges are, and that helps with that engagement as well.
So when you landed at Queensbury, what was your role and what did that look like and what were the projects that you were working on?
So I came in under John as development manager. At the time, we were delivering a lot of town centre regeneration, but very heavily retail-led. At the time, retail was still sort of probably at its peak and had a few years of good times left. So we were working with a number of funds. We did a fair bit of work with Mayor Bergman, helping deliver a scheme up in Bradford that they'd JV'd with Westfield on. And that was a really interesting one. It was a partnership where Westfield stayed on for a year post-completion, and then it flipped over into Mayor Bergman in terms of their own assets. So whilst we sort of had a watching brief through the development, we then delivered a second phase for them, but we were able to be a part of that transition from delivery into operation and then learning about how that business works in terms of driving revenue for Mayor Bergman going forward. So that was a super project. And we were down in Guildford as well, working with Merseyside Pension Fund, repositioning the Tunsgate shopping centre there, which again had huge technical challenges, existing shopping centre with the shops below, very tight town centre site, but also looking at how do we leverage the best value out of that asset. And the wider Queensbury team, we had a fantastic team, a lot of people who've gone on to senior positions in other businesses in the industry. Really, that was quite problem solving. How do we get the income streams up? How do we get the right tenants here? How do we drive the footfall? And then winding that back into what are the technical challenges around the site? And how do we deliver an asset efficiently that ticks all these boxes in terms of resilience for it going forward?
There's lots of different phases of the development life cycle. Can you just break those down for me? Just share that. And because I think there'll be some people who are probably listening to this who might come at it from more of an investment perspective, but it'd just be good, I think it would set the context and the scene for later in our conversation, just in terms of those different parts of the development life cycle.
Yeah, no problem. We work with our clients around the front end. We work with clients on acquisitions and also where they've got existing assets they're repositioning. So we place a lot of emphasis on the front end and the briefing and what are the actual outcomes of a development. And that's quite a challenge sometimes because we work in a sector where setting clear goals which are specific to the development are sometimes quite difficult. There's a great guy called Rory Sutherland who works for Ogilvy, who are a marketing business. And he talks about Eurostar back in the early 2000s. And they invested, I think, 6 billion quid in speeding up the trains for customer satisfaction. And he talks about that and he says, well, instead of investing 6 billion quid, if you're trying to improve customer satisfaction, why don't you just employ the world's best looking supermodels, serve free Chateau Petrusel on the train as it goes along, and after 4 years, you'd probably still have 4 billion quid in your pocket and everyone will be a lot happier, you know? So we try and look at that reframing on our projects and understand with clients, actually what's the important outcome here and how does that work for the rest of the team? So we do a lot of front end, developing that brief with clients. And then we're into a position where we can start to build the project team. Again, a lot of times in our industry, teams get put together through relationships, but sometimes those relationships override actually what we're trying to achieve somewhere. And everyone has a different skill set that's specific to a project or a scenario. So we get the brief right, put the team together, and we do a lot of work with clients at that point about establishing the boundaries. Everyone reports to someone. So, you know, what's the end up in terms of funders? What are their stop-go sort of gateways? and other constraints that might be around a scheme, so that we can really set the team off in the right direction and drive forward. And then we're into what we'd probably see as the more typical delivery phase in the industry, driving forward towards those goals. We've set a clear brief, we've got clear goals as a team, we've got the right team around the table for those goals, and then we'll take it on through for delivery. And then particularly now with some of the new challenges around the Building Safety Act and ESG, it's really integrating the operational piece as well. You know, our role in our world doesn't stop the day we sign a practical completion certificate and all shake hands. It's about how does that asset perform going forward from a sustainability point of view, from an economic point of view, and delivering for that client into the future, 2050 and beyond.
So those kind of 4 or 5 different parts of the process, did you kind of hone your expertise at Queensberry on various different projects that you were managing at different stages? Is that where you kind of really learnt about this process and this structure and built your expertise?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I'd come with that sort of technical delivery mindset, and fleshing out the front end in terms of brief was a bit of a learning experience. And it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to get people to stop thinking about what's going to happen and how great it could be, and actually coming back to what do we need to do. So Queensberry was a great environment for me to learn about that front end, and all our work in the retail world helped with the back end, the operational piece, because you're delivering assets that ultimately might change over time, you know, depending on the tenancies that the incoming tenants will take. So it was about the front end and the back end that I really learned at Queensberry, which we've been able to pick up and take into our Trigon model. Yeah,
and arguably, shopping centres probably back then were one of the hardest asset classes to get your head around, right?
Yeah.
You'll probably tell me different now, but especially with student and BTR and PRS, whether that's even more challenging. But I guess having that real grounding, front to back to front, really kind of cemented that skill set. Talk to me about your decision to leave Queensberry and why that came around and what you went on to do.
So I went from Queensberry over to B-Corp, a private equity developer based in London, did a lot of retail, and we're moving into other sectors, doing essentially schemes where we could develop out and grow a business to then ultimately exit from that business. I think I was just at a point, I was ready for a new challenge, and through a mutual contact, met the B-Corp guys. And going into B-Corp was again, a big learning experience. We, at the time, had a holiday park platform that we were working on with Angela Gordon, and that was about buying new assets, developing them out to grow the income, stabilising that business, and then ultimately exiting from there. So it was a whole new world around looking at EBITDAs and how does this business operate whilst we're building away and developing. How does that actually interface with the bottom line of an operational business, which was fantastic, really good fun. Big learning experience. We were partway through delivering a few hundred holiday homes in the UK when COVID hit, so that brought its own challenges as well. But it was just another part of the bigger development real estate cycle that I was really keen to go and explore.
I don't like the word, but I guess moving up the food chain, right? Or in terms of the chain of command or decision making, is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And being able to influence, the overall operational efficiency stroke profitability of a business at the end of the day. And I think that they were sort of the steps away from perhaps sometimes being a little bit constrained around having a little piece of the pie and trying to be able to influence it in more areas.
Did you kind of realize or understand the why a lot more, like why decisions were being made, and maybe where you'd had frustrations previously, you could have a little bit more empathy to that situation and why that was the case?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's quite refreshing to, strangely, get to the end of a process, realise what you didn't get right, but then have the opportunity to put it back in at the front end of the process. And in our role, when we're involved in every facet of a development with different varying amounts of input and control, that's quite a lovely part of what we do, being able to learn and put it back in at the front end and gather that data and be able to explain to clients and teams, look, we've done this before and this happened, so this time let's put it in at the front end, let's learn from it, and we can take this in a slightly different direction.
So other than the holiday homes and parks piece, what else were you working on at B-Corp? and what are the other projects? And can you just tell me a little bit more about that business for people who haven't heard of it?
So at the time, we were buying a number of uncon sites, getting planning, and whilst we'd go through the planning process, we'd find a tenant to wrap a lease around it. So we did a number of student assets in Nottingham. When we did that exact model, and IQ went on to take that site. We did the same with Unite, who took another site up there. And similar in London with some resi development. So we had quite a model of getting through planning and quite a pressure on getting the right planning consent. I think the industry is changing with the other pressures, but when you've got an end operator, you need to make sure you're delivering to exactly what they need and bringing them on that journey and trying to negotiate a planning journey whilst you're getting someone into an agreement for lease or whatever it might be. There's quite a few technical interfaces there that need to be picked up. And ultimately, there's a number of personalities around the table again who need to be brought on the journey so we can get there as quick as we can and ultimately sell the site, forward fund, whatever it might be, and move on to the next one.
Can you touched on something called uncon there, so unconditional. For someone who hasn't heard of that before, can you just explain what that means?
So that would be if we're buying a site that has no planning and there's no conditionality on the purchase. So we're just buying the bit of land. So there's a higher risk profile on that. So we would do a lot more again at the front end, understanding risks and constraints around that site. And are we confident we are going to be able to get a planning consent on there? Because the investment's prior to getting that comfort. And it's something we still do with a few of our clients now, looking at uncon pieces of land, understanding can it meet their needs and doing that technical piece at the front end.
And highest and best use for what type of asset should go on that piece of land.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really good fun, right? Throwing mad ideas out there, understanding different income profiles. We're working with a client at the moment, which is an office scheme in London, existing building. We're doing a cut and carve, extending it up, creating more floor space, creating a resilient asset from an ESG point of view. And we'd just rentalised the ground floor retail. We'd put a number on it and rentalised it. And actually working through with them recently, we've looked at actually they could take that space. And instead of just taking a rent, they could operate out of there and take some income. So we're now looking at on an income-based model on them operating down there. That's going to be far more beneficial to them than just letting it out as a rented space in the retail world. So those are the sort of discussions and challenges that are really, really good fun as you go through development, and they can make a huge difference at the back end. One
other thing that you just touched on there is cut and carve. What is cut and carve for someone listening to this? Because I think it's important, right? We talk about development. There's so many different nuances, sayings, and parts of it. Can you just explain what does cut and carve mean and why is it important?
So cut and carve, my first jobs with Cisco were all of this ilk, but cut and carve is taking an existing building, essentially cutting parts away and putting new structure or new floor space into it. And they can range from fairly straightforward, taking a floor off and adding 3 floors, to some pretty complex stuff we've done for the Crown Estate, taking the full guts of a building out, retaining facades and coming back up through with new elements of structure. They are riskier, obviously, in terms of risk profiles in cost and program, but they're really great fun. And you really see the engagement from a design team when you start coming across challenges through the design phase, but when you get on site as well, trying to work intuitive solutions around things that we discover in an existing building. So they're really good fun. They're challenging, but you've got to be working with clients and teams who understand risk profiling and understand how we can mitigate that in the best way.
And there's also an embodied carbon play and an ESG angle to it as well, right?
Oh, 100%, yeah. There's a lot of work in the industry around the embodied carbon of cut and carve, new build, how do they compare? There's a lot of sort of knock-on effects of cut and carve. You might just be extending the structure, but that means you need to go in the ground and strengthen foundations, and that has an impact as well. But it's definitely leading towards that ESG and reuse of buildings, which is a huge topic in the industry at the moment. And it's balancing that with the other requirements, be they economic or operator and tenant-led demands, and making sure we're knitting all that together in the sweet spot.
During B-More, you kind of had an entrepreneurial itch, and kind of Trigon, I think, has been in the back of your mind for a long time. Can you just tell me how that came to the fore and what was the circumstances around deciding to set up the business?
So working with the guys in B-More, we collectively really, I went to them and said, look, I think we can be more efficient if we basically carve out the DM and PM. Let's set a separate business up. I've always wanted to do that. And let's sort of attack some of the challenges and the nuances in the industry that we see day to day. So there's sort of two main facets that drove me to set the business up with James, my business partner. The first one being we look in the industry and see projects just get shoved through a process. And that whole front end piece of understanding the constraints and the challenges of a project. And a project plan should be bespoke to a project and a client and the deliverables. And we looked out at the industry and we didn't really see a number of people who are approaching projects in that way. So that was one of our main drivers. And secondly was the ball of risk I talked about and being able to have a wider influence on a project and use the learnings and the data and the expertise that we have and have access to be able to plug those in and get the best results.
So that was the idea, that was the opportunity. How did you actually bring it to life?
So we set up as we went to COVID, which was challenging at times, but ultimately we were very lucky. We were working on a transaction in Vauxhall, again with Angela Gordon actually, and we were very lucky that we were able to have some trusted partners that we set Trigon up and help them transact on that. We sold it into one of our repeat business clients now, Third Eye, an Australian residential developer. So that was sort of our springboard to be able to have an appointment day one, which is often the challenge. So we set up in the back of the B-More office and had our first employee through the door. And that really drove us forward, having that fee income from day one. And we were able to grow from that. And
so B-More kind of invested or... and how did you actually get the business off the ground, like from a risk perspective as well, and financing? You touched on you had a client that obviously give you some fee income, but how did that actually come about?
So we've got a few personal backers who, myself included, who put some equity in to start the business essentially, and we went from there really. And we were lucky to be able to pick a few jobs up over the first year, which gave us a bit of a standing to be able to grow and eventually move into our own office. And just having that space in the B-More office was invaluable. And we weren't out looking and taking leases and whatever else comes with that. So we were able to limit our exposure and really focus on doing a good job on the first projects we had and going back and growing our client base as well.
And talk to me about the part of the industry that you fit in. So you're a development management business. So you do development management on behalf of developers and other LPs and capital allocators for a fee. That's the business model, just on a fee basis rather than a co-invest?
Yeah, that's our business model. Yeah, at the moment we're working with clients. Some clients we might have a slightly different structure in terms of timing of fee and how that's geared against what the outcomes might be. But essentially, yeah, we're a fee-earning business. And we really push sort of three key things with our clients: sort of transparency, proficiency, and adaptability. And that came out of us looking at people shoving things through processes. So that front end with clients is trying to understand those three pillars and being able to sit in front of someone and talk about the good things, the bad things, the risks. Risks aren't necessarily bad; they just need to be managed and mitigated.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because they're your guiding principles, right? Those three, and do they have a bearing or an influence on why you called the business Trigon as well?
We called the business Trigon because we were struggling a bit with the name, but yes, that had an influence. Trigon's emanates from the triangle being the strongest shape, and our three pillars as well. We had some fun naming the business. One of the guys was coming up with some great names until we found out he was just Googling long words out of Harry Potter.
Right.
So none of those made the cut.
It wasn't over karaoke, was it?
No, it wasn't this time, no. So we drive those three principles externally with our clients.
So talk to me about the business today, the team, and some of the projects and clients that you work with.
So internally, we sort of founded the business we built a mission statement with our guys, which is building focused, creative and calm environments that inspire trust and collaboration. And we looked at the key pillars of our project and sort of our ethos is if those key pillars are there, if it's calm, if people know what they're doing, they're focused, there's space for creativity, if we've got trust around the table with teams, then we know we're going in the right direction. And if we're drifting away from that and we feel one of those isn't quite there, that's sort of our red flag to jump in and understand what's going on. So with that mission statement, we took that out to some of our previous clients and some of our new clients, and we really looked out in the market with potential clients and funders who had some of those traits, and we could see the way they worked and see there would be a synergy and complement that as well. So we were working for some of our older clients, probably 2 or 3 of them, but we really grew some new relationships quite quickly in the industry, sort of adapting those principles.
And can you just share a couple of them? I know Bloom, Tom Davies has been on the podcast. I think he was the 3rd episode that I released. So I know you're doing some projects with Bloom at the moment, but also Halkin and Angelo Gordon and B-More as well, you still support. Yeah,
definitely. We're on our 4th project with the Bloom guys. Really enjoy working with them. That really is problem solving, tight city centre sites, bringing L&D into sort of zone 1 and 2. And the challenges that brings. So we've had great fun with them over the last 3 years. We're working with Third Eye, I mentioned, Australian residential developer. We got 2 schemes on the go with those guys. And again, we work with them pre-acquisition, understanding their constraints and how can we structure the project to ultimately deliver and get best value. We're still working with the Angelo Gordon guys. Again, we've got a really good relationship with them, very open and honest and transparent, which really sits at the core of what we try and do. Cheney Capital, we're doing a bit with. We know the guys there. They're involved sometimes on the funding side in our projects and directly as well. And we're just moving back into sort of the regen market. We're working with Evolve Estates up in Billingham, looking to form a JV up there and deliver sort of 16 acres of town centre regen. And we're in Lichfield as well with them. So we're getting across the sectors again now, which gives us a nice spread.
Yeah, I was going to say, and what are those kind of sectors and the projects that you are working on?
So we've got about 800,000 square feet of beds, as it were. So be it private resi, we work in extra care, which is a fully affordable product for people who need support or care. So we deliver those in partnership with Surrey. We've got a scheme just going on site this year in Guildford, which is 60 units, one in Cambridgeshire, outside of Surrey, obviously, and another 4 or 5 sites coming forward with Surrey. So we'll be sort of 350 beds on the go with them quite quickly. We're seeing co-live come to the forefront as well in the bed sector. So we're driving on with 3 projects now, in the co-live sector. And the L&D stuff with Bloom, sort of 50,000 square feet on the go with that. And the town centre regen's really coming forward as well. We've sort of got over 1 million square feet now coming through the pipeline. And busy on the acquisitions. We've got over 2 million square foot of development currently going through acquisitions with 3 or 4 clients. So exciting times.
And are you finding those sites and those projects that you're kind of taking to clients, or are clients finding those sites themselves and taking them to you for you to do your DD and analysis on it and input as well?
Predominantly, the client will have identified an opportunity or an asset. We've got a few cases, for example, the extra care, we will form a consortium to bid through the public process in terms of taking control of an existing site. But the council will have an idea of what they would like to deliver on there. It needs to be in extra care sector, normally forms part of their pipeline. We've got a couple of clients who had existing assets that we've looked at with them and said, look, what can we do with this? How can we make this better for our business? And they tend to be more operational businesses than sort of real estate / development focused clients. But majority of our sites are, our clients will bring them and say, look, can we have a look at this together? How can we get this to stack up best?
Talk to me about your skill set and then James, your co-founder's skill set, because I think you're quite yin and yang, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we are quite different, which is very healthy and challenging at times. So we place a lot of emphasis in the business around personalities and understanding how people interact and empowering our teams with those sort of skill sets. We work with Insights, which is one of a number of sort of personality profiling type tools that we roll out across the business. So James is very blue, very detail-led, very focused, needs to know every fact before making a decision. And I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I'm sort of red and drifting into yellow, so I'm a bit more direct. and a bit more sort of on the wider spectrum in terms of strategy and pushing things forward.
And then talk to me about the kind of the team you've built and how you've gone about doing that as well.
So the first one is empowering them. So we really believe in giving the guys the tools to be able to do their jobs. So we place a lot of emphasis on CPD and not just technical, taking the guys through, how does a wider appraisal go together? How do all the levers in this development influence each other? And then on the softer side as well, we do a lot of work around the insights, a lot of work around how the guys manage their time. How do they manage, themselves outside of work, the switching off and switching back on again on a Monday morning, and trying to sort of harbour that within the team so people are empowered. And we take that into the project teams as well. The part of that briefing and goal setting at the beginning of a project is to get everyone aligned with a single goal so that everyone is part of that decision making and part of that journey. And we really see the benefit of that when a project's really ticking along well. People are committed, people are bringing ideas to the table, and we're getting the best results.
So you spend a lot more time, it sounds like you spend a lot more time at the front end, really aligning what does success look like, getting all stakeholders, whether that is developer or GP, as well as kind of capital fund allocated to the project, all the other parts together in a room or whatever it might be, spending a lot of time there so that you can kind of then reverse engineer the project to make sure that everything is aligned.
100%. And sometimes that's challenging because sometimes you've got to keep digging and getting to sort of the root position. What is the outcome here? What metric is it? But what does it actually mean to you? So that can take quite a while to get to the bottom of. But once you're there, there's clarity and everyone's bought into that vision. And
then I guess it filters through in terms of the calm thing you touched on, in terms of, your team being calm, there's trust inherently there. And there's also a kind of a plan and a process to enable your team and the other stakeholders to go and do their best work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. If people know the parameters that they're working within, they know what we're all trying to achieve. People are bought into that process. And we do it internally with our mission statement. We have objectives underneath, and everyone in our team has an action that leads into one of the objectives. So we check in every quarter. One of them's having fun. So people we've got a social committee and all the usual things. Some of them are around communication internally and externally. But everyone in the business has a small part to play, that when you plug it all together, ultimately, if we can achieve that mission statement, then we collectively know we're going in the right direction.
Talk to me about the team. Who's in your team and how do you segment it and split it?
So we've got quite a flat structure really on the delivery piece. So we have development managers who tend to look after the bigger jobs or sit over a few jobs. So we've got Lauren and Michael in those roles currently, and a new recruit, thanks to John, who arrives in April to take one of our larger schemes forward. And then we have a role of PM. So we have a number of PMs in the business who perhaps run more the day-to-day, but are gathering that information, gathering that sort of intelligence and learning about the wider development piece, and looking ultimately to move into those development-led roles. And then quite early in the business, we brought other skill sets in. So as a lot of businesses, we've got Steph who runs all our marketing. And Sabina joined us, who, while she runs the team and looks after all the facilities, she's also spearheaded our B-Corp accreditation and movement, which has been a massive part of us being able to knit the team together and drive some of those values through the team. And then last year we had Agni join us from a non-real estate world. She's done various roles, but most recently at Ernst & Young. And Agni looks at our data management, our business improvement, and sort of operation level. How do we operate as a business? How can we be most efficient? And how can we address some of the challenges in the market moving forward, being sort of innovative in our approach, but ultimately delivering a service level for our clients, which sometimes in our industry, we get into an agreement with the client, give them a proposal, agree services, but actually then we just report on the project for 2 years, which is a totally different metric to what we said we would do. So tying in how we work with our clients and deliver a service for them is a huge part of our business.
And actually taking her without any sort of real estate context and getting her to apply that or objectively look at how you can improve it. It must have been a challenge, but also quite refreshing as well to have a fresh pair of eyes on the business.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been refreshing for the whole business. Everyone within our team has really appreciated that. I'm sure Agni won't mind me saying, I think it blew her mind a bit for the first few months. We're not the most efficient or lean industry, and I think everyone in real estate appreciates that. We've got a long way to go in embracing technology and bringing efficiency to how we work across all sectors, really. But yeah, every time a different viewpoint on something is so valuable, and it works both ways. Sometimes some ideas or ways of working don't fit. So there's a two-way balance on it.
Can you just talk to me about what are the behaviours that someone needs to attribute or have that makes them a Trigon fit, or what are the things that you kind of look for that people must have to have a real impact and fit into the team?
So we have a massive focus on transparency. We sit down every week briefly on every job. People bring their 5 biggest challenges on a job and we chuck them on a table. And as a whole business, we go at those challenges and find a way to change them, resolve them and work together. So transparency is really important, and just being able to put it out there for discussion. I think the other thing that we really focus on as a business is people being able to come in and really look at chunking up how we attack projects. A project can be 2, 4, 5, 10 years long. And if you try and look at the whole thing at one, it can be quite challenging. So we break our projects down. Every quarter, we set the next 3-month plan, and we run with that. And that allows, again, clarity on goals in the short term, so people know what we're heading for, and we can do that together. And then we really push collective decision making. So as a business, if people have got big decisions on projects, they're made as a team within those meetings. So we're all moving forward on every project, whether someone's actively engaged or not.
Sounds like there's that just continuous learning loop, feedback loop, and creating an environment where the most junior or inexperienced has got a voice or an opportunity to raise their hand and point at a particular challenge or give a good piece of constructive input into how something might be resolved.
Yeah, we're in an industry where a lot of people have a huge amount of knowledge and expertise, and sometimes you need the wacky, mad question to break the mold and make us think, actually, is that the right thing? So 100% it's about chucking stuff on a table, talking about it, and leaving it on the table when we leave the room, however silly we think it was or however great the outcome was,
You touched on B-Corp. Can you just talk to me about that journey and why you wanted to pursue it? Because it took you a year or so, and it's quite onerous, and for a relatively small business, it must have sucked quite a lot of time, effort, and capacity away from winning new work or delivering new work. So why did you want to do that?
It's been a really, really humbling journey, really, B-Corp, and we were very lucky. The reason we honed in on it was we were very early in our evolution as a business, and we saw it as a tool to be able to instill those values from the outset. And I think for us, we're probably slightly lucky that we were able to bring it into the business so early, where it's actually informed a lot of our values, rather than a highly developed business, and sometimes you're trying to undo things to then go forward again. But we really saw sort of the 3 pillars of it: people, places, and profit. Really saw those as a huge part of what we do as a business. We were all about developing the people, working with them, looking after them internally and externally. The places we work, obviously, a huge amount of our work is regeneration based. Whether we actively see a single development as being part of a wider regeneration, wherever we're developing, it is having an impact on the place. And ultimately profit, delivering sustainable profit that's ethical and delivering on our clients' needs. So we were able to instill the values of the B Corp into the business and drive them forward and use it as a springboard rather than a change in direction.
As we sit here kind of middle of February and we look forward, what does 2024 look like for Trigon as a business? What's the plan? Can you just let me into a little bit of your thought process? So
I mentioned we've got 3 big assets currently going through acquisition. So they will get rolling, and they're long-term plays. So that will definitely keep us busy. I think we are driving towards a number of completions this year. We've got a couple of the Bloom jobs, which are finishing this year, which is a great milestone for the team, actually delivering and finishing and seeing those assets move into use. And continue to tackle some of the challenges in the industry around the Building Safety Act. We're now seeing it weave into projects at Gateway 2 stage, which is basically starting on site. And the level of governance, which is quite right, but we now need to go through before we can start on site. So we've got a big learning year on that front. And on the ESG front as well, we're delivering a number of schemes now aligned with the Paris Agreement, working with the UK taxonomies. So we'll see Camberwell and Greenwich, our 2 Bloom schemes, be delivered and certified as such. And an office scheme, we're working through a cut and carve office scheme, taking that through planning with that accolade as well.
So you've got an awful lot to navigate and get your teeth stuck into. How challenging is it, just given policy and regulatory changes that keep getting thrown at the industry? How challenging is it to kind of navigate those?
And they're definitely a challenge. They're changing the norm, I think. And actually, finally, we think we as a sector and industry are now driving to do things properly from day one. And we have, if we're all honest, been in an industry where at times there's been shortcuts to get to specific milestones in a project, be it back in the day, very sort of high-level planning permissions to allow someone to flip a site, which perhaps wasn't the best solution for the site, but served a purpose. So with the Building Safety Act, with ESG, we're seeing those weaved in, but they're being weaved in at a very, very high level within a development, from seed funding to completion to operation. These are now key themes that need to be considered and need to be part of that plan. And it's quite refreshing to see how the industry is embracing that. And
is that a fight to quality? I know that's a kind of a terminology that's used kind of more on office space, but is that a fight to quality in terms of how just governance, compliance, how people approach and want to engage with partners and make sure that they're ticking every single box they possibly could so they don't get dinged at the back end?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And it's about doing it efficiently, we think. And again, goes back to the briefing point, like what are the specific outcomes here? For example, the work we're doing with Bloom on the Paris Agreement, it's not adding considerable cost to projects. It's just about understanding it at the front end and making sure we're aligned with those outcomes. And on the taxonomies, essentially, we're delivering outcomes that are aligned with Article 8 and Article 9 funds. So there's demonstrable evidence at the end that this asset, if you invest in it, if you buy it, if you come within it and operate as a business, you are aligned with our commitment to limiting global warming by 2050 by 1.5 degrees.
Talk to me about the changes in the product that is being developed, whether that is driven by LPs and capital allocation from a build to sell to a build to operate, and also kind of some of the social norms and expectations of real estate as well.
I think we found over the last few years that the social pressures and the social norms you mentioned have changed drastically. I think when I grew up, you had to buy a house as quick as you can and get a mortgage, and that was stability. Whereas we're in a generation now where people's perception of stability is perhaps more about being tied into something than being stable. And we're seeing that across the asset use classes that we're working on with co-living and BTR and sort of rental products that, whilst they're economically driven in terms of affordability, I genuinely believe there's actually a social change as well, where people only want to be committed for 3, 6, 12 months at a time and not have that longer term commitment, even if perhaps from a more simplistic point of view, your overall expenditure is higher. So we're learning to adapt with that with our clients, and that really drives into the quality of the product that you mentioned in terms of delivering quality products that are resilient going forward and drive a longer income model. And that sort of ties in with some of the pressures at the moment with, inflation rates, 500 basis points on interest since 2021, and how funds and investors are adapting to be able to utilize their capital, ride out a bit of a storm, and look further into the future.
Yeah, because it must be really challenging in terms of that storm you touched on, from inflation, construction costs, delays. I guess that whole transparency and honesty piece that you kind of touched on really comes to the fore there. But how have you been able to navigate that the last few years? Because they've been some of the real challenges, right?
Definitely, yeah. And I go back to my mad rugby coach, to be honest, because inflation is something we can't affect. It will happen. We can influence it at various levels, but it's happening. So we've looked to try and break our projects up into what can we influence and what we can't, and how do we get back to what is our end goal, by adapting and changing elements, be it use class, be it how we build it, be it how we operate it, be it how we market it, and influence the bits in the development that we can with our clients. And sometimes those are quite open and tough conversations. But if we put to one side things that are stressful, but we can't change, and focus on what we can actually influence, then we can drive things forward.
You touched on earlier in our conversation the role or the impact data and technology will have. Can you just elaborate on that and just share a few further thoughts on how you see that fitting in?
So obviously the data world's so important now, and data's always existed. We've just been terrible as a nation, I think, or as a world in collecting that and actually using that data. For years, everyone's talked about lessons learned and trying to capture that. And the challenge has always been capturing that data, but putting it back in and using it as value, not just realizing what we probably should have done better or what we did do really well. So we're really driving the use of technology. There's psychologist George Miller who talks about the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. So the human brain can only deal with about 7 things. If you're a genius, maybe 11. If you're less of a genius, maybe 5. But to efficiently deliver and operate, we can only do 7 things. So we really see technology as a way of harboring that data, but managing all the things that should be automated in this world. And it's not taking the human element away, but it's managing process, bringing data in, analysing it, and giving ourselves the tools to use our 7 holes in our head to make those right decisions and move forward.
And do you think that's around more transparency in a project in terms of having more live updates and it just being faster or more accessible, or where specifically do you see that being applied?
I think that's the window to it, definitely, yeah. And we're working with a software operator at the moment, working through all our workflows and plugging those into a software platform so that at any one time, we, clients, project team, exactly as you describe, have a live dashboard and can see the push and pulls, where the challenges are, where the risks are. And it ties into the front end as well in terms of actual risk identification and management and making sure we've got a strategy when a risk does start to realise itself. We have a human nature of trying to ignore risks, and that is the truth. We move away from danger generally. So having that harsh reality and that clear data in front of us at all times, transparently around the table, allows us to make better decisions, but make decisions earlier in the process.
What are you most excited about as we look forward and cast our mind forward, and where you want to take the business in the future? What are you most excited about?
I think really see using our expertise to inform development decisions at the front end. And I really think we've touched on data there, but the work we do with different clients, being able to understand the outcome and then shape a solution around it, and that being different for each client and each project. And I really think we've made great strides in doing that with our current client base, and we've got 5 or 6 clients who are now sort of into our 3rd projects with, so it's paying dividends. But being able to learn together is a huge part of what we do. So we really want to drive that forward and be delivering developments where we've developed a solution at the front end and we see the fruits of that into its operational phase with our clients.
Amazing. Well, look, Andy, a question that I ask everyone that comes on the podcast is, if I gave you £500 million worth of capital, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to deploy that capital? So
it took me a while to come up with this, I won't lie. So I thought I'd have a little exec board of 3 people. Guy I mentioned earlier, Rory Sutherland, who's a marketing guy, and he's into reframing and setting the picture and understanding goals. A guy called Daniel Goleman, who is a bit of a leadership sort of guru. You might have heard of him. So have him as sort of chief of building the team. And then I'd have Judith Hackett in there, not because of the technical side of it, but her attitude to doing things properly, which I think our industry can learn a lot from across the board. And then we'd put up our repeat business clients in there just to keep them happy. But also we've shared so much knowledge with those guys that, we're still learning from them, they're learning from us, and plugging that in would be invaluable. So in terms of property, I think we'd really focus on a regen asset, somewhere where people work, live and play. And I think sometimes when we describe that, we think everyone lives in a box and works, lives and plays in the same place, but actually creating a destination where those 3 are interchangeable. And it's not the people who are living on the site who are doing all 3, but create that And that feeds into, creating a wider change and seeing the wider impact of a development in an area. Again, feeding back to the B-Corp piece, places people profit, and making sure we're delivering resilient assets as well. And the place, we have strong roots in London. So we would love to do a wider, and we're working on a couple bigger EGM piece in London, but we obviously love the wider UK. We're now spreading out and working across different cities. But really a city centre regeneration piece would be what we'd love to do.
Wow, you've absolutely nailed that question. All three parts of it, all the try elements of the question as well. Andy, you've had a phenomenal background from pulling pints and doing some dodgy karaoke to using a hammer on site through to kind of running and scaling a leading development management business. You really have done everything front to back to front. And I don't think I've been able to do justice quite to your background and experience, but I really appreciate the time and consideration and thoughts that you've imparted. For me, a kind of a core takeaway is just the trust, the transparency, the calmness, and quality of work that you do, and actually taking that time right at the start, the genesis of a project, to make sure that all stakeholders are aligned. And I often think it's so overlooked, but it's a lesson that I think all of us in an advisory capacity could really take stock from, is slowing down to speed up and making sure that everyone is aligned and running a really thorough, robust, quality-driven process. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your background and story, and really excited to see what you and the Trigon team go on to do.
Super, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show, or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.